What's up? Welcome to Founders Club. I'm Alex Lagos, and today you're in for a treat. Matthew Hertz, founder of Third Person, joins us to share his journey from running a successful logistics consultancy to building an AI-powered software platform. Matthew unpacks the transition from service-based work to scalable SaaS, software as a service, the hard lessons learned from a co-founder breakup, that's tough, and why retaining 51% control is non-negotiable for decision-making in your business. He also discusses his spaghetti career path, just wait for that one, the difference between who you know and who knows you, and shares why true networking is about adding value for free long before you ask for anybody to give you a check. Enjoy this one, dive in, let's get into it.
Awesome. Well, we got Matthew Hertz here today from Third Person. We really appreciate having you on the Founders Club podcast, a place where founders can build community and learn from other founders. So we really appreciate you coming in and speaking with us today. So Matthew, I guess the best starting point for this podcast, you've been in business for a long time, specifically logistics. Fun place to be in, kind of a weird place to be in right now, but where did this all start? Like, how did you start your career in business and turn it into something?
Yeah, sure, and excited to be here, Spencer. Thanks for the invite. So I suppose I've been in business for some time. Third Person has only been in business for about a year and a half, almost 2 years now. As you suggested, most of my career has been in supply chain, e-commerce and supply chain, and really the crossroads of those two markets. Earlier in my career, I actually started in finance. I did that for a couple of years, but back when I was living in New York, did it for a couple of years, but got bored of it because, well, it's finance.
Yeah.
And
so you jumped to logistics.
Well, yeah, exactly, right. It's probably even more boring, in some ways. But we can talk about how later about how I think it's actually not boring. Earlier in my career, I joined a couple startups when I was in New York, companies like Rent the Runway, as well as Birchbox. Joined them as a very early employee at both of those companies and really in an operations or supply chain capacity. So that's where I sort of cut my teeth in ops, logistics, supply chain. I kind of use those terms interchangeably. Spent some time at those businesses helping them scale up. Rent the Runway is now a public company. Birchbox was mighty successful, kind of at its peak. We were doing several $100 million in sales. Moved out to California. Spent some time at a logistics startup there, another venture-funded logistics startup called Ship, and that spent about 4 years there. And then in 2017, so about eight years ago, I started a consulting business. So really taking the experiences and the learnings that I had in sort of being in-house at other people's startups and learning that way to sort of say, all right, well, now's the time that I can, I have the confidence to start my own business. I was also born and raised in Canada, so it wasn't a coincidence that in 2017 I had gotten my green card. For those who are sort of familiar with the immigration process, that finally gave me the ability to truly be an entrepreneur and start my own business. So I took that as the opportunity to. So 2017 I started a consulting business, really helping the next generation of e-commerce brands solve or hopefully avoid a lot of the same challenges that I had when I was in-house at companies.
What were some of those turning point moments? Because I think we all have those. Working in a company, you learn what to do, but also what not to do. So what were some of those key insights that you had early on that led you to say, I think I can do this, I can consult, work with a lot of different clients and support them? Were there any key aspects?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been entrepreneurially minded, right? Like the first foray I can remember. I was trading baseball cards when I was, in second grade and third grade and trying to rip off, my friends, right? Kidding aside, in high school, on my resume, I have which I haven't looked at in quite some time, fortunately, but, even on LinkedIn, I believe, which I guess is kind of the modern resume, my earliest experiences that I had something that I wrote something along the lines of I survived the first .com crash, which is true because in 1999 I actually had a sports card and collectibles business that I was selling on eBay and other auction sites in Canada. So I was literally a teenager. I was 12 or 13 or 14 at that time. So I've always been sort of commerce minded and entrepreneurially minded, but I never really had the wherewithal to kind of start my own business. And given the immigration process that I mentioned a few minutes ago, I legally was not able to truly be an entrepreneur in the U.S. So to more specifically answer your question, Spencer, it was really, in 2017 when I got that confidence that I can start, or, not even confidence, when I got the legal ability to start my own business in the United States, I said, this is really kind of that signal that I ought to do it. So fortunately, I had developed a lot of really good relationships with, friends, folks in my community who, from the other startups that I was a part of, who had then gone off to start their own businesses or to be, leaders and executives at other startups. So they started coming to me saying, hey, Matt, if you ever have a little bit of capacity on your hands, we'd love to have you come in and look at our operations or help consult. So, after a few people kind of shared that with me, I said, well, let's just do that, right? Consulting, there's very low barriers to entry, right? Anyone could start a consultancy tomorrow, right? You just need someone to pay you, but you don't have to buy equipment and, a whole lot of infrastructure. So,
it's about, for me, I think it's about adding value, right? Like having enough value that other people recognize that you can add value for them. Exactly how I started as well. Like people were asking me to do things that I was already doing with the companies I worked at. I think a lot of people question though, like, am I ready to do that? And so like, how would you suggest, someone who's maybe been working in corporate or at a larger startup thinks about like, how do you go from I'm working in this company, because it's completely different. Consulting kind of led me into starting a company, but I feel like that's kind of the sequence that you should take probably is low risk with consulting, then move into your own business. So that's my framework. Do you have a thought framework?
Yeah, I exactly. And when I started doing some consulting, back in 2017, I didn't envision running a consultancy. Right. Lo and behold, 7 years later, I was still running a consultancy, right? 6 or 7 years later. But it was really a way for me to, kind of exactly what you're suggesting, Spencer, or what you personally experienced. It was really a way to sort of thoughtfully transition from being sort of a full-time employee, a W-2 employee at a company, knowing that every 2 Fridays I would get a paycheck, right? And I'd have all the health benefits and all the perks that come with being, in most startups, being an employee. But, when you're full-time employed, certainly for me, like I didn't have the mental capacity, the energy to really think about what I really wanted to do when I grew up, right? Yeah. Or when I grow up. Yeah. I was so focused on solving my company's problems, that I was tasked with solving as a leader at those businesses. So, to your point, consulting for me, and it sounds like for you as well, and other friends of mine who I know have similar businesses, maybe in different, whether it's marketing consulting or finance consulting, it doesn't matter. But it's a nice way to kind of like test or like try before you buy.
Yeah.
Right. To like, and obviously, it helps to have clients who are paying you, right? I mean, anyone can call themselves a consultant, but you don't really have much unless you have active engagements, right? Everyone's got bills to pay, but, it's a really nice way to like, I just think back, all those years that I was consulting. I mean, I probably, and, I still do a little bit of advising on the side. And we can get into, I'm sure later what, where I spend most of my energy today professionally, but it's a really good opportunity to, experience, dozens or have exposure to dozens and dozens of different companies. I mean, I worked with probably 150, 200 different companies through my consulting business. So I met with, 200 different, I saw 200 different P&Ls, 200 different management teams, 200 different, corporate cultures. And it really starts to help you understand, like, where are the problems in the world?
Yeah.
In the, professional world.
You got to get the reps, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to your point, it helps you understand what maybe you don't want to do, but also hopefully what you do want to do.
Yeah.
Where are the problems?
100%. Do you think, throughout this process, obviously you've taken it from consulting to a new business. Like, how important is the network you built? You're one of the best networkers I know. You have a huge network of people at a lot of different types of companies. So how do you think actively about building that network? Like, what's your thought process there?
Yeah, I think it's definitely my superpower.
Yeah.
And not to sound cliche, but it truly is, right? I often joke, and I've been on some other, podcasts and webinars or, public forums where I say, like, I was never the smartest kid in class, right? Like I wasn't that 4.0 GPA, honor roll student, right? I was, but I was always very street smart. And I always knew where I wanted to get to. And I knew that it may not be sort of that traditional linear path, right? You do this, and then you do that, and then you do that. For me, it was kind of like more of like a spaghetti pattern, right? It was kind of like you do that, maybe take a step back, and then you go forward. Anyways, for me, like, my sort of core competency, my superpower is absolutely relationships and networking. And I know it's as I said, it's kind of cliched. It's not what you know, it's who you know. But it's very much the case for me. Like, I take so much pride in developing relationships and being, a good person, and people respecting the work that I do, right? I don't have to be the biggest company out there. I don't even have to be the best company, but I need to be a respected company or a respected person. And specifically in consulting, as well as, early days in starting your own business, it's you. Like, you are the brand.
Yeah.
Right. Like, people come to me because they want to work with Matt. Right. They don't, they didn't necessarily, some of my clients didn't even know what my consultancy was called. Yeah. Right. But they trusted
Call
Matt.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Right. And, it's sort of like, you think of like a doctor, right? You have loyalty to a doctor, right? You don't know, you don't necessarily know what their practice is called, but you want to go to doctor, whatever their name is. So, relationships and networking is so important, especially, nowadays with everything, just the proliferation of social media and everything going on.
How do you go about building authentic relationships? I think everything is so surface level for a lot of networking groups and different places that people go to develop these types of relationships, or they're actively seeking something. I think for me, the biggest thing is like, I'm not going to ask you for anything. Like, if something naturally comes up, then great. I have a lot of competitors that I'm friendly with that I send business to, vice versa. But how do you think about, like, is there intentionality into how you're building your network? Or are you kind of just moving through the world and building relationships with people that you enjoy talking to?
I mean, it's both, right? It's I try to be very intentional with how I interact with people. I've also been a very big believer in doing a lot for free.
Yeah.
Like, not, I'm sure people where, for the right to talk to them, they charge you, a couple $100 an hour. It's just very transactional, very commercial. And, of course there's a time where, you got to get paid for the value you're creating. But, like, I've always been a believer in, like, what goes around comes around. And I heard this quote the other day, to actually maybe correct what I just said about it's not what you know, it's who you know. I heard someone say, it's actually not who you know, it's who knows you.
Yeah.
Right.
That is a good point.
And it's so subtle, but so important. And, I think you establish a positive reputation and sort of a leader or subject matter expert by, getting your name out there. And you get your name out there by being willing to, like, get on a call with people, right? And like, just, obviously time is limited, and you don't have time for dozens of calls a day, but and it's sort of, nipped me in the butt at times where I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got 8 calls today and tomorrow, and it's so tiring. But like, those are the reps you got to do to like get to where, you know, you want to become. And for me, like, I have a newsletter that I've sent out for about 8 or 9 years now, free newsletter. I just crossed my 200th issue. I think we're up to 203 or 204, and it's, you know, I read it on Beehive, you know, the email marketing newsletter platform. And like, I've never thought about charging anyone a nickel. I also don't have sponsors, right? It's just, it's raw, it's honest. It's got a little bit of opinion. And, you know, I post a lot on social media, and like, I don't monetize any of that directly. Now, sure, I've gotten clients from that.
Yeah.
Right. I've gotten a lot of interest out of that, but I think it's this idea of like, you know, what goes around comes around, and like, do as much as you can for free, because you'll find a way to monetize that in due course.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Eventually, I 100% agree with that. Now, kind of moving from your consulting days, and, you know, you've built a huge network in that process for consulting, and then you've moved on now to you've started your own business. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your business and how you decided to launch that business, why it adds value to the world. Yeah,
absolutely. So, third person, thirdperson.co. We're too cheap to buy the .com. In fact, we weren't able to hunt down the person who actually owns the
.com. Oh, you couldn't get it?
Yeah. No. Such a weird kind of universe, the whole like domain.
Yeah. Did you send a broker at them and
we
stuff?
We did. And literally never got a response. And I said, hey, like, tell them that we're willing to pay anything.
Yeah.
You know, I just want to communicate with a human. And apparently the person who owns the domain bought it in like 97, and I'm not convinced the person's alive.
Probably not.
And yeah, it's a whole other kind of topic of conversation of like, you know, the whole domain world, and, you know, should those domains be put back in the public? Anyways, I digress. But third person publicly launched it in March of 24. So coming up on 2 years now. Third person is really a AI powered platform that connects e-commerce brands with logistics providers. And, you know, if you think about that, that is effectively the core service that we were offering at our consulting business. So, you know, the consulting business that I ran for, you know, about 7 years, we were, you know, effectively helping e-commerce brands and retailers, you know, avoid a lot of the challenges that I faced when I was in-house as an operator at some of those brands that I mentioned earlier. So while consulting is a lot of fun, and as I said earlier, encourage folks to kind of do the consulting path on their own to sort of figure out what they want to do, you know, as the next chapter in their life, you know, as they approach starting their own business. But you know, after 7 years, my business partner at the time and I, you know, we sort of looked at each other and said, like, yes, this is fun. You know, we're making good money. We're our own boss. You know, if we want to take off next week, we can, and no one's going to yell at us, hopefully. But it's not scalable.
Yeah.
Right. And like it's not software.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it scales fairly linearly. And what I mean by that is, if we wanted to double our business the following year, we would have to either work twice the number of hours or hire more people or charge more. So, you know, over the years we tried, you know, the charge more method, and that worked a little bit. But, you know, the point is that, you know, if we wanted to take off the next month, although I've never done that in my life, but if I wanted to, unfortunately in consulting, like, the business stops, right? Because there's no one to do the work.
Yeah.
Right. Or, you know, if you have a partner, you know, your partner does the work, but, you know, you're unable to. So the beauty of software is that, you know, software, product, you know, technology can kind of work while you sleep, right? So to speak. So, you know, skipping over some details, you know, in the interest of time, although I'm happy to dive into any of that, Spencer, but, you know, we sort of had that aha moment a few years ago, you know, wrote up a, you know, business plan, figuratively speaking, although also literally speaking.
What does your business plan look like? I've seen a lot of them throughout the years. Is it just a spreadsheet or a PowerPoint?
It was mostly, a spreadsheet. Yeah. It wasn't a PowerPoint. It wasn't, a pitch deck. It was more of like a financial model to like validate that, like, okay, if we hit certain assumptions, like, we actually have a business that can be sustainable. Yeah,
that's what I recommend a lot of founders do, because you get these people that have a beautiful, you know, presentation, but no math behind it.
Exactly. And we were always very rooted in the economics and sort of the P&L and the cash flows, and once we given that third person would be kind of like a natural progression of the consulting business, we kind of knew we were able to identify a few of the key variables. So for us, it was more just sort of putting pen to paper, so to speak, and putting certain assumptions down. And if we needed to raise any capital, or how do we finance the business initially to kind of build the product, because that obviously costs money, as well, Spencer, in your business. And then once we kind of got the confidence that okay, this makes sense. Then we hired a technical co-founder, because my business partner and I are both non-technical, and started building what became Third Person.
How is that differing? You're in the logistics world. You had confidence in what you decide to productize. I think a lot of founders go through that. I can't scale past the number of hours that I have. And so you get to where you're let's jump into SaaS. Let's build a software product. How does the software business differ from the logistics business? Are there major differences that you've kind of had to evolve in your founder's journey, or does it still suit your strong suits? Are you learning about the technical aspects, or is it kind of just left up to your technical co-founder?
Yeah, what's been really interesting about Third Person and building Third Person is, as I said, I'm non-technical, which means I can't code and develop. Although there are AI tools today that make an idiot a technical idiot like myself actually look decently intelligent, and every day they're getting better and better. So it really is incredible to see kind of the acceleration there. But for all intents and purposes, I'm non-technical. I can't code. I can send an email. I can set up a calendar invite, but that's really the extent of my technical chops here. That was a significant handicap of mine, to be candid, and that's why we decided to hire this resource, who's sort of our CTO, technical co-founder, because while I had the vision, and I continued to be sort of our head of sales, head of BD, head of partnerships. I've always been more on that side of the house, as we were talking about earlier, with kind of networking and relationships. But I need that technical team, and it's not just our CTO. It's designers. It's we have engineers in Poland, offshore. We have a team now who can sort of help take my sort of vision and my product roadmap, and sort of build the product behind it. So it's been really educational for me to kind of understand. Consulting is really easy, right?
Yeah.
And it's not easy to get new clients, but to run a consultancy is fairly easy, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you use QuickBooks, and you have your Google Suite, and you have a few basic, maybe Zoom and Calendly and a few other kind of basic tools like that. But it's not there's not too many problems to solve. The moment that you're building a product, you're building software, especially someone like myself who's never done that independently. Now you're dealing with dozens and dozens of questions and problems on a daily basis. And, it's not just myself and the consultancy. As I said, we have a team of today 7 people who, now I'm managing, in addition to trying to build the product and move the business forward. So it's been sort of like a crash course, like an MBA course in business building, and it's taught me a lot, about the intricacies of building a software business.
Oh, 100%. How has it changed your thought process about how you grow? Because as a consultant, you have a lot more control. This is something I had to learn in tech too, especially when you're managing other talent. There's a negotiation between what you want and what's possible, especially in the time frame that you want to deliver it. Do you ever have challenges there, figuring out how to negotiate that with your team, where you do lose that control and you're dealing with something you don't know 100% about? That's something that I struggled with until I really learned the technical side of things.
Yeah, delegating is incredibly difficult for me.
Yeah.
Because I probably just trained my muscles to not be able to delegate when I was running, a 2-person consultancy, right? And we were sort of, yin and yang, right? He was focused on kind of his side of the house and I was focused on my side of the house, and we didn't have any other resources to help us. But today when, we're building software, we're building tech, and that's not my core competency, I am required to delegate, right? And I am required to trust others will be able to do their job effectively and probably a heck of a lot better than I can. So it's been a very quick and important change that I've had to work on. And, I'm not perfect. You can ask some of my, support and, employees that, there are moments where I should kind of relinquish control more so than I do. But, it's so important to really take pride in the resources you have, because, we are resource constrained, right? I wish we had 17 employees.
Yeah.
Google and NVIDIA and Apple and the biggest companies in the world will probably also tell you that they're resource constrained. So, it affects everyone at all scale. But when you're dealing with really small numbers, when you only have 6 or 7 employees, adding 2 more people increases your staff by, 33% or 25%, right? So it's a big lift right there. So for us, resource constraints and not being able to move as fast as I would like us to move, right? I have this vision in my head and, on paper. And I sort of have I know where I want our product to be in 12 months from now. And, I wish I was technical. I can just start coding tonight when I get home, to sort of help get us to where we need to be. But, that's just not possible. So it's this kind of push and pull as you're sort of alluding to.
For sure. Now, I don't know if this is stepping back or stepping forward, but you raised money, correct?
I did. Yep.
Okay, so did you decide early on before you launched the business that you were going to raise money to, I'm assuming that's for labor and overhead, to do that? Or did you learn throughout the process, like, hey, we're going to have to bring in some people?
Yeah, we have raised, in total, a little over $500,000, basically 2 equal rounds of about $250,000, 250, 260, somewhere in that range. Launch Tennessee, here in Tennessee, their Invest Tennessee fund also participated in our round in fall of 2024. Our initial round was in fall of 2023 when we started, building the product and hiring resources. So, the business is not truly bootstrapped, but we've tried to reduce the amount of capital that we've had to raise. And candidly, we still have a good portion of that money sitting in the bank as cash. So, we're not hemorrhaging money. And my philosophy has always been to build sustainable businesses, financially sustainable businesses. Right? I'm not. I didn't set out to build Third Person into a $10 billion business. Yeah. If we get there, wonderful. That's fantastic. But I've given my experience in consulting and being immersed with many brands, and also personally, I've invested in a handful of tech businesses and software businesses. I've also advised a number, and I look at some of them, and it's just it's appalling to me how some of these businesses, or what the outcome of some of these businesses are, just given the amount of capital that they've raised. So for me, I'm always in the camp of like less is more. Yeah. There's a time and a place for raising capital, but I've been pretty comfortable with the money that we've raised, and it has all gone towards resources. Our contractors and consultants and employees that we have. Just in the last few months, we've really started to push the pedal on marketing. So not traditional paid marketing, but going to events and conferences and hosting events and happy hours and putting together. We have a webinar series and other engagements like that. Cost money. So given that we are an early stage business, there is cost associated with getting us off the ground. So, I did go that route of raising a little bit of capital.
And where did you, before that, did you learn about this whole process? Because I think, we're looking at raising capital. I've always been a bootstrap founder. We're looking at raising capital for a project. And I'm thinking to myself, do I do it or not? Like, we can grow slower, or we can grow quicker? Like, that's really the question in my mind. But did you learn before you launched the company about raising money and how that process works? Or did you learn as you went?
Yeah, I had a fair amount of experience. Like I said, Spencer, I've personally sort of angel invested in a few businesses, mostly led by, friends of mine and people I trust. And, through that experience, you kind of like go through like, what is a safe, the Y Combinator safe, and like, how does that actually work? And, what kind of information should you be getting from the business that you've invested in, like quarterly reports or monthly reports, whatever the cadence is. I've also continued to actively advise a couple of venture capital firms and a private equity firm. So, I've been fortunate that I had some experience on what that process looks like. Doesn't necessarily mean that it made it easier for me to actually raise money, right?
Yeah.
Like asking someone to pay you or to invest in your business is really, really difficult. Well, asking may not be difficult, but getting them to say yes is difficult.
Yeah.
Although for me, I've also found asking people for money to be a difficult thing to do. It just doesn't come natural to me. But I've gotten better at it over the last couple of years. But yeah, so I've certainly had some experience doing that. But there's so much information out there. Now with different AI tools like Claude or GPT or whatever is your preferred tool. Just Google and Gemini. There's a lot of good information on like helping founders determine how much money they need to raise and what that investment tool looks like. Is it debt, or is it convertible debt, or a safe note, or other tools like that. So there really is no right answer, besides leveraging the internet to kind of determine the right path forward for you.
For sure. And for you raised a relatively, it's a good amount of money, but it's not like some massive VC raise or something like that. Do you have any thoughts on, because a lot of people don't think about the politics of raising money, the politics and the administration of it. Like, those are two things that you have to do throughout the process. Have you had to think about that at all? Or are there any pitfalls that is that maybe a reason that you decided to raise a lower amount?
Yeah, we have a lot of, I have a lot of control on the business, right? I'm the CEO. I am, the largest shareholder. I own more than 50% of the business, and the board consists of myself.
There you go.
That wasn't always the case, and
Okay.
I did have a business partner, a co-founder when we started Third Person. And the two of us decided to go separate ways in the summer of 2024. That has probably been the biggest business learning of all, through this experience. But today I am, kind of the one in charge. So, specifically to your question, Spencer, on fundraising, typically if you're raising institutional capital, right, not from friends and family, and like my capital that I've raised is friends, like truly friends and family.
Okay.
Besides Launch Tennessee, but they don't take board positions. I think I have 36 or 37 people on my cap table. So you can do the math, and like the check size is $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 on average, right? So definitely on the smaller end. And for me, especially at this early stage, having control on the business and control on the direction and not owing anything to anyone, literally, was and continues to be really important to me. So I would just sort of caution. And again, there's a time and a place for raising institutional capital, and even for us at Third Person, we might raise institutional capital if I determine that that's the right path forward. But the moment you do that, while you get the benefit of having a cash infusion and maybe mentorship from that VC or from that institution, you do lose a lot of control, and they will probably take a board seat. And the moment that you have people on your board, you're not the only one in charge.
Yeah, no, and I think a lot of people forget about that. They just see the possible cash infusion and they think, everything's going to be perfect, but there's a lot more to it. Right there, you kind of just touched on something. You said, one of your biggest learnings in this process had to do with your partnership. What makes a great partnership, and what recommendations would you make for someone basically interviewing a partner who might start a company with them?
Yeah. as I said, like the biggest learning by far, at this point, in our, roughly 2 years of business at third person, is the importance of partnership. And, my now ex sort of co-founder, co-CEO, we maintain a very amicable relationship today. Ironically, he and I are, we're business partners in our consulting business. So for us, I'll just speak for myself, when we decided to kind of evolve or transition into third person, kind of like the software offshoot of our consulting business, my approach was like, look, we've been business partners for, I think at that time it was, maybe, 4 or 5 years. And, for those kind of familiar with like the Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger partnership, back in the day, like, there was barely a squabble, right?
Yeah.
And for us, I mean, that was the truth, right? But I think we realized when we started this new business that all of a sudden there's many more questions to ask and problems to solve. And as I sort of mentioned earlier in this podcast, consulting was really, really easy, particularly relative to building a software business, a tech business. So all of a sudden, my partner and I decided that maybe we're not as aligned as we thought we were. And we both have very different perspectives on how we should build this business. So huge learning for me. I do not want another co-founder, in this business. I mean, it's probably too late now, now that we're a couple of years old, although, I've seen it before. But whether it's, a co-founder or an early employee, your first employee, or even your earliest employees in your business, it's really, really important for you, and my bias is you, listeners, when you're setting out to start your business, to maintain control of the business, right? Like a hard and fast rule, make sure it's not equal, right? Like it cannot be equal. Like if it's just you and them, this other person, and you're both 50-50, 2-person board, co-CEO, like, no, someone needs to have.
You're going to have a deadlock at some point. Yeah.
And that was our problem, right? Was that, he wanted to go left, I wanted to go right. I wanted to go left, he wanted to go right. And it's like, well, like, what ended up happening was, we weren't actually focused on the business. We were focused on internal politics.
Yeah.
And every night, I would go home banging my head against the Coke machine, trying to like sell my case to him, and, vice versa, have him sell his case to me. And like, who does that benefit?
Yeah.
Right? Like we're not being fiduciaries to our investors and, to our employees and, to the value that we believe we can create with this business. So hopefully you're the one with control, right? Someone needs to be 51% owner, shareholder, and, lesson learned. And I'm very fortunate that we learned that lesson early. And, it's been almost, 2 years since, he and I decided to part ways, and we're the business is better than ever today.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that 50-50 partnership, a lot of people see that and they don't want to have that conversation early on. But I can assure you, you don't want to have that conversation later on in the business after you've done all that work. So it's much better to have that conversation up front. And I do think it is okay to take on partners in a minority stake. Or be a minority partner in a project. You don't have to have all the control, but someone has to drive the ship. And so I completely agree with that 100%. So now I guess at this point, you're building third person. Like, where do you hope to take it? What's the overall vision for the business moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, we are very early on, in our journey. So, as I keep saying, just about 2 years now, do I want to be building this in 20 years from now? I'm not sure. We'll see where, the market takes us. But, I mean, my goal is to build a, cash flowing, profitable business, a business that's creating a tremendous amount of value for the ecosystem that I'm engaged in. And, that's sort of broadly the, e-commerce and supply chain or, logistics industries. So, just in our first, few quarters here, I've been really pleased with, some of the early data that we've received, the early traction, as we think about, that sort of cliche term, product market fit. There's a lot of truth to that. I don't think I can quite yet wave that flag that we've like achieved that, but I think we're pretty close to it. Both from a early revenue perspective and just traction, right? Like having people use the product, right?
Yeah.
Like every day when I wake up and I see overnight, while in the few hours that I actually do sleep, that like more people are signing up overnight. I'm like, that is so cool.
Yeah.
Right. Like that was honestly, I don't want to dismiss all the value we've created, but like for me, like one of my signals of success with this business would be that like we're actually creating value while I literally sleep.
Yeah.
Right. Which is different than our consulting business. Right. Consulting business, I was creating value by doing work, by sending an email, by putting together a report, by getting on a call, by visiting a client, et cetera. Right. Like sort of more real or like tactical. And now I'm creating value, right? Brands and logistics partners are like connecting with each other and networking, and I'm not even doing anything, right? Like the product is living and breathing and doing its thing on its own, which is like, it sounds so like simple, but it's so cool to see that. So yeah, I mean, I want to build, a real business. I'm really, I really enjoy building it here in Nashville and here in Tennessee. I think it's a very I know it's a very friendly state and frankly city to start a business. Be a founder here in Nashville. And as I said earlier, I don't have goals to like hit 10 million or 100 million or $1 billion in value, but I think every day we're just trying to get a little bit bigger and better and learn and try a bunch of stuff, and all while maintaining the integrity and the trust that our partners have in us.
That's awesome. Well, this was great, Matthew. We really appreciate having you here on the Founders Club podcast. Where can folks find you?
Yeah, I'm very active on LinkedIn. So, if you just pop in my name, Matthew Hertz, you'll be able to find me there. You can email me, Matt, M-A-T-T, at thirdperson.co. Remember, not .com, .co. I'm very active on social media. So, we'll love to connect with anyone.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Spencer.